So, with Season 3 of Amazon's The Wheel of Time on the horizon, and it looking so much better than the first two seasons, I think it's time I visit a topic I really should have tackled a long time ago. Why, contrary to what many book fans will shout from the rooftops, I would argue that Sony and Amazon's The Wheel of Time is not, in fact, one of the worst adaptations ever made, by any stretch of the imagination. I've watched a bunch of terrible adaptations, and this show is nowhere near on the same level of awful, even in its weakest moments. In fact, though it's a bit disjointed and clearly affected by exterior circumstances like COVID and strikes, it's honestly pretty good at its best and just meh at its worst. And today, I'm going to explain why, starting with a recap of the first two seasons and my thoughts on them. Spoilers for the first two seasons of the show and the first two books, and bits from books 3 and 4. We start with Moraine and Lan arriving in the Two Rivers, where we meet our main characters. Nynaeve puts Egwene through an initiation process that's totally not foreshadowing anything. The celebration of bell time is interrupted by Trollocs attacking. During the attack, Perrin loses control of himself and fridges his wife. Moraine reveals herself as an Aes Sedai and helps fight off the Trollocs. Nynaeve is unfortunately missing in action, for now. And when everyone regroups, Moraine tells the three main boys and Egwene that they have to leave with her for Tar Valon to escape the Shadow. This fanatical cult called the Children of the Light show up, and they are super duper shitty and they hate Aes Sedai. Meanwhile, Rand starts having nightmares. When he wakes up, the group is still being pursued by Trollocs led by a Myrddraal, so the group has to flee to Shadar Logoth. When they settle down, Mat finds a dagger with a ruby on it, and then Mashadar, the malevolent entity within Shadar Logoth, starts coming for them, and they have to split up to survive. This is when Nynaeve catches back up with Moraine and Lan, and after some convincing, she agrees to go with them. When Moraine is well enough, they get going and they ride to an Aes Sedai camp where the false dragon Logain is being held. They make it to the camp and they spend some time there until Logain breaks free and he almost kills his Aes Sedai captors. Until Nynaeve goes Super Saiyan to turn the tides and the Aes Sedai link up and gentle him. And then they push on to Tar Valon and report to the Amyrlin seat about what has happened. Perrin and Egwene hitchhike for a bit until they are taken in by the Tinkers. And then they get captured by the White Cloaks who torture them for a while, but Egwene burns through her bonds with the One Power, and Perrin accidentally summons a pack of wolves to attack the camp, and then they escape. Rand and Mat continue towards Tar Valon. They hold up in a town with an inn that happens to have Tom Merrilin performing in it. A dark friend leads Rand into a trap, which he escapes from, but then he and Mat are cornered by the dark friend, and she spouts the philosophy that since the Shadow will win eventually, there is no point in opposing it. The boys are then saved from her by Tom. They travel to a farmhouse, and Tom reveals that the Red Aes Sedai killed his nephew when they found out he could channel. Unfortunately for all three of them, a Fade shows up in the farmhouse, and Tom buys time for the boys to escape. The boys do make it to Tar Valon, though Mat starts acting weird after a point. Rand also meets an Ogier named Loial who is held up in a library, and he mistakes Rand for an Aielban. Everyone then regroups, and Moraine finally separates Mat from that stupid dagger, and they head off through the ways to get to the Eye of the World, and to determine who the dragon is. Mat does not go with them, though. As they are reaching the other side, Machin Shin, or the Black Wind, shows up and torments everyone before they escape, thanks to Nynaeve, who goes Super Saiyan once again to get rid of it. They finally make it to Fal Dara, and they meet Min, a woman who can have visions of people's futures, and she has visions of all the main characters doing significant things. And Rand, after thinking on it, finally comes to terms with the fact that he's the Dragon Reborn, and he confesses it to Moraine. In the final episode of the season, we start with a flashback to Lews Therin, the previous dragon, who ended up splitting with the Aes Sedai of his time in their plans to imprison the Dark One. Returning to our main crew, Rand is tormented by dreams of the man with fire eyes. And back in Fal Dara, Egwene and Mat go to see Min, who sees bad things happening in their futures. An army of Trollocs approaches and everyone gears up for battle, while Nynaeve and Egwene link with some other women who can channel to destroy the Trolloc army, which almost kills them. Rand and Moraine, meanwhile, make it to the Eye of the World, where they are met with the man Rand has been seeing, and he tries to tempt Rand to the dark with images of what his life could be like with Egwene. Also, he shields Moraine from the power so she can't channel to protect Rand. But our boy doesn't fall for this Anakin Skywalker bullshit, and seemingly destroys the enemy. Meanwhile, the mysterious Padan Fane, who has been haunting the group, shows up and he steals an important artifact called the Horn of Valir that can return spirits of fallen heroes to fight. Season 2, we see what the fandom calls the Dark Friends Social, where Ishamael meets with some Dark Friends and tries to mess with this girl who showed up. Nynaeve is back in the tower and she's having trouble embracing Saidar on command, but she gets tried for an acceptance test anyway, and though the test is greatly troubling, she succeeds against all odds. They also meet a girl named Elaine Trakand, the daughter heir of Andor. Amidst their studies, Liandrin, the Red Sister, shows up again and leads the three of them through the ways on a supposedly important task. But of course, they are led into a trap by the Seanchan, and Egwene gets captured by them and made a Damane, women who can channel that are used as basically magic artillery slaves by the Seanchan army. Mat meets Min in the prison and she gives him a viewing of something significant happening around him. Liandrin eventually releases them, and Mat briefly meets with Rand before he gets kidnapped and taken to Falma, where Ishamael tries to use the dagger to corrupt him. Perrin and Loial are tracking Padan Fane, who still has the Horn of Valir. Perrin eventually finds a Fade nailed to a door, showing that Fane isn't a regular Dark Friend, and they get captured by the Seanchan. Shortly thereafter, a man named Elias and a wolf named Hopper, along with the whole pack, show up to help Perrin escape the Seanchan. As he runs away from them, he eventually comes across an Aiel woman named Avienda who has been caged by the White Cloaks. Perrin releases her and they fight their way out together. Perrin goes with her and some other Aiel to Falma, as they are waiting for a man called the Karakarn, or the Chief of Chiefs, a hero told of in their prophecy. Rand tries to get what information he can about saidin from Logain, though it is proving to be difficult. Rand is also visiting a suspicious woman named Selene. Selene, of course, turns out to be Lanfear the Forsaken, who has a soft spot for Lews Therin. Who could have guessed? Moraine saves Rand, and they need to make a run for it. Unfortunately, Lanfear captures Rand in Teleran-Riode, and she tries to win him over, but it doesn't work. Also, she told him what's been happening in Falma. Rand tries to leave to go help the girls, but he gets stopped by the Tower Aes Sedai. In a second escape attempt, Rand is able to break the shield on Moraine, and with some unexpected help, he leaves for Falma with Moraine and Lan. Egwene is subject to brutal training that the Damane go through, and during this she puzzles out that Sul'dam can channel just as Damane can. The White Cloaks attack Falma, and then basically everyone comes together. Hopper helps Perrin when he gets pinned down, and then a White Cloak named Jeffrem Bornhald kills Hopper, and Perrin kills him in retaliation. Egwene escapes by putting the Idam on one of her captors. Unfortunately, after she busts out, Ishamael shows up. Mat attaches the dagger to a staff, effectively turning it into an Ashandari, so he doesn't have to touch the dagger directly. And he's able to cut the Horn of Valir free from the box it has been in this whole season, and he blows it, summoning the heroes of the Horn. Perrin gets a shield from one of the summoned heroes, and he uses it to help Egwene against Ishamael. Rand eventually gets there, and with a bit of help, he kills Ishamael. Seemingly. As the season ends, Moghedien pops up, revealing that more Forsaken have been released. Okay, with all that said, let's take a closer look. Let's get the big one out of the way right off the bat. A 100% faithful adaptation would never have worked, or even a mostly faithful adaptation probably would not have worked either. The Wheel of Time meanders a lot, like there's a 4-book segment in the middle of the series literally known as The Slog by fans, which I made a video about not too long ago. Even beyond that, the books linger on plot points that wouldn't be too interesting to watch, like visiting various towns on the way to Tar Valon, or traveling with this menagerie, or looking at papers in Teleran-Riode. These things can be engaging in the form of a book, because in epic fantasy books, and The Wheel of Time especially, readers are in for the long haul, and are willing to push through everything because books just have a fundamentally different appeal compared to visual media. That's why adaptations need to make changes, to account for the fundamental differences between mediums, and for some stories it can be more difficult to make the jump even if all the pieces are set right, but that doesn't make it impossible. Taking a look at what the show does do, it keeps key character arcs, plot points, and themes of the story intact. Rand still wrestles with his destiny the entire time he's on screen. It's just that since we can't experience his thought process, we need to get all this from his reactions and dialogue. Even with that limited exploration though, it's clear that he's struggling with his own sanity. We haven't gotten much from Matt at this point in the series, and this was true for the first 3 books as well, but we do know that he's the jokester of the group, and he wrestles with the darkness of the dagger, as well as his own selfish desires. But he's clever and resourceful, and he does care about his friends. Perrin, yes, Fridge is his wife in episode 1, a character who was not in the books and was created for the show just to kill her, but this also started his long arc regarding his relationship with the beast within. He realizes he has a connection with wolves, but also a bestial rage that comes from it, and those powers, when they flare up, are destructive to those around him. And this comes to a head when he ends up killing a White Cloak with a family. Yes, this happened under different circumstances in the books, but that's irrelevant here since it's still early in the series, and most importantly, it still happened prior to the Battle of the Two Rivers, an event where the White Cloak's view of him is very important. Nynaeve is very assertive and does not like to surrender control, which makes her very strong-willed, but it makes her uncompromising and unwilling to surrender, including to Saidar without being angry. Moraine is still the mostly serene, wise Aes Sedai, who becomes fierce if threatened, but even her sanity and worldview is shaken multiple times during the story, and she has to figure out how to adapt to the changing times. Elaine and Egwene are still finding their footing, but significant events are shaping who they'll become in due time. Loial is mostly laid back, but he's inquisitive, intelligent, and compassionate, and he sounds just like his audiobook counterpart. The Aiel are brought into the story a bit sooner than in the book, and instead of it being some rando that Perrin saves from the White Cloaks, it's Aviendha, which is a good change, since she's a much more important character in the greater story. Ishamael's nihilistic take on the state of the world even gets brought up by this one Dark Friend in Season 1. This is way earlier than it was introduced in the book, but again, TV audiences aren't necessarily in for the long haul, so including it this explicitly and this early makes sense from an adaptation perspective. Everything I just said is super important stuff from the books. I'd say the most important parts of the books to adapt. And looking at the Season 3 teaser, it already shows another important change, having Liandrin's leaving of the White Tower be a full-blown channeling brawl, i.e. something that's a lot more exciting to watch for a TV viewing audience than what the books did, which was have her leave quietly and mysteriously in a way that left the remaining Aes Sedai with lots of questions that get explored in depth. I feel like the internet has made people more prone to looking for flaws in anything that's less than a 10 out of 10. Nothing can be decent to good, it has to be the worst thing ever or the best thing ever. Though usually it's because of one thing: comparison, often to another piece of media or a previous story. And I believe that's what's going on here. The Wheel of Time book series is a massive journey that's masterfully crafted, for the most part, but it's close enough to be considered a masterpiece. Despite its flaws, it's at the very least a 9 out of 10, arguably a 10 out of 10. Amongst hardcore fantasy fans, it's one of the most iconic fantasy series for a reason. The show, on the other hand, is a flawed but still pretty good fantasy story that at this point is still finding its footing and is slowly growing in scope. It adapts not the base plot of the books, but does adapt key world-building elements and character arcs from the books in the best way it can. Though for me personally, it only manages to be a 7 out of 10, even at its best. Thus far, at least. And that seems to have set a lot of people off. Over the course of the release of the first season, this fandom went from being arguably the best fandom I've ever seen to one of the worst fan bases I've ever seen. And while fandom toxicity is far too big a topic for this video, seriously, I could make another one of these giant-ass videos going over every observation I've seen of modern fandom. But for now, all I will say is that I will not tolerate toxicity on my channel. I am here to facilitate thoughtful, nuanced discussion, and though I try to be positive, I will criticize if my criticisms are genuine. Either way, you can always expect honesty from the Mythos archives. And even then, Season 2 was a big step up from Season 1, and it looks like Season 3 is another step up from there. Maybe it will win some fans back over. Either way, I look forward to watching and discussing it with all of you. Phew! Finally got this video out of the way. So, what's next on the list of fantasy TV adaptations for me to defend? Fuck.